You know, people constantly joke that I save everything. And if you saw our scrapbook room, you'd probably believe they're right. Mary Kay Cosmetics has a rich history, and I'm so glad that we've preserved a lot of it for those to come in this company. When Tape 5 came up in the Pearls of Wisdom, I decided that maybe it would be fun to take you behind the scenes and between the lines of our history to hear some of our memories of these wonderful 30 years. And today, joining me, there are several of the people who were here from the very beginning. From day one, National Sales Director Daleen White actually helped me to hang the drapes at our original location in Exchange Park in Dallas. And you know, Daleen, I've always wanted to ask you this question. Were you really just doing me a favor becoming our first consultant, or did you think we had a chance to succeed?
Oh, Mary Kay, I never doubted that it would succeed. I just don't think I or any of the rest of us really realized to what extent it would succeed.
You're right about that.
But as I watched you in those first weeks, I saw how you picked up and went forward with the dream despite heartache after your husband's death. And how could I not at least pick up a showcase at that point and go on? I didn't even get discouraged when that first sale we had didn't pan out too well. You know, that lip and eye palette that we got back broken.
Yeah, we sold one.
Sold just one.
$400 ad, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And we sold one lip and eye palette.
But I think what it really was, we just never planned to fail.
No, we didn't.
It was just go forward.
Daleen, that is so true. I guess it never even occurred to me that we might fail. I just thought we had to do this. It was a responsibility I felt that God had placed on my shoulders to give women a chance to do anything they were smart enough to do. I'm so glad that we just went on despite all of the negativity that we had encountered. And you know, the next person that you're going to hear served in the Marine Reserves with my son Richard. And one day he came by our office 28 years ago to sell us a safe. And I guess you might say that from that point forward he never left, because today Gerald Allen is president of Mary Kay International.
Thank you, Mary Kay. I don't know if I've ever told you this or not, but I wasn't really sure, I guess because I was in the Marine Reserves with Richard and we were just a couple of guys, of whether this opportunity that he wanted me to join was real or not. In fact, the first interview I didn't even show up, and he chided me for it at the next meeting. I introduced myself to you, and I knew immediately that this company was going to succeed because of the look in your eye and determination that you exuded. The confidence was just overwhelming. And I said, I went home, and even though Richard was offering me a fourth of what I was making to start, and the only reason he offered me that is because he wanted to get a raise from you. And from that very beginning, watching you work and the work ethic that you had, it has given so much of us, encouraged so many of us to make your dream come true.
I'm so glad you decided to take that cut and pay and come with us anyway. Yes, the work ethic is important to me, and it obviously was important to this industrious young kid you're going to meet now, who worked 2 jobs. He was parking cars at a funeral home and putting himself through school when he took a 3rd job working in our warehouse. And today, that person is our Director of Special Events, Ron Trammell. Ron is the lucky guy who got to drive that pink Cadillac I found in Los Angeles home back to Dallas, and what an experience that was.
Yeah, it was funny. Remember how you came upon that car? We were doing a meeting in Los Angeles, and you were driving through Hollywood and saw this car in the showroom. And this wasn't just any pink Cadillac. As you remember, this had Landau windows, heart-shaped, and so I volunteered, when I didn't know any better back then, to drive this car back for you.
As I recall, you didn't volunteer. I made you do it.
You know, here's this macho guy driving across the country in this pink car, heart-shaped windows. You can imagine the reaction I got from the truck drivers and everybody else going by, honking, pointing. I was a little embarrassed, so I got me a hat, so hopefully if I saw anybody I knew, nobody would recognize me. And then on the way, it was such a long drive, I decided to stop at my mother's house in Abilene. And I didn't think anything about it. I parked in front of her house, and about 8 o'clock at night, I heard people going by honking. And then about 9 o'clock, I go out there, and there's a whole crowd around there taking flash pictures of the car. And as you can imagine, it was quite an event around the small town of Abilene at that time when they'd never seen a pink car before.
Well, I wish we'd gotten that kind of curiosity when we first started the business. But, you know, I guess one of the best things that we did was to locate next to the coffee shop.
You know, Mary Kay, speaking of that coffee shop, I remember how you loved that pimento cheese sandwich
yes.
they served.
Mm-hmm. Remember, it was on Friday. It was the only day that they had them. And we just loved them. We always made it a point to go over there on Friday and get some pimento cheese sandwiches.
That's where we had lunch after every training class on Fridays.
Yeah, it was, really. And another thing I remember so very well was that lunch group we had. You know, there were only 5 of us, so we took a day each. And each of us would bring lunch.
I had Thursday.
You had Thursday.
Yeah.
What day did I have? I've forgotten.
Is that where you got your cooking bug, Gerald?
That was it.
Well, we used to try to outdo each other and bring in lunch, and we had some wonderful lunches around that little table.
You remember the wigs we sold in those days?
Oh, do I ever. The whole idea behind the wigs was that women were very excited about wigs in those days. They cost several $100s. They were human hair. And every woman wanted to try one on, but most of them were a little embarrassed about it. And I thought if we could get some wigs and first get the men to change their makeup to match the wig they were going to buy, that it would be a real good sort of entree into our little cosmetic shop. Nobody wanted to buy any of that Mary Who stuff, you know. And so that was the reason that we did that. And I went to Florida and met Rene of Paris. And we somehow got him to come to Dallas for our opening and style those wigs. I remember telling him early in those early days, you're going to hear from us one of these days. But little did I know how much he was going to hear about what we have been able to do.
You remember the time that the lady came in and one a friend of yours, I think, and she wanted us to put bras in the line.
Yes,
and boy,
I
Richard and I
remember.
really got excited about beauty classes then. We thought that would really be fun to have bras in our line.
No thanks.
Another one knew.
I nixed that idea, and I'm so glad we did. Incidentally, that company went down the drain. So we didn't need those
A bust,
things.
you might say.
Yes, you might. Well, I'm glad we talked you out of that idea. And speaking of harebrained ideas, that reminds me of another story. There was a psychologist located in our Exchange Park building up on one of the upper floors, and he came by one day and gave us the idea of having a psychological test to determine whether or not someone would make it as a consultant. Could she sell? And I decided that the best thing for us to do to see if this really was on the level was for Richard and for me to take the test ourselves. And if it wasn't good, we would know it if the results came out wrong. And so that's how we started, and Richard and I took the test, and the psychologist came down to explain it to us in lay terms, and it was very interesting what he said, because he said, you know, let me put it this way. If a man came in here and was bleeding to death on your rug, Richard would be saying, hey, fella, you mind getting off that rug? You're getting blood on it. And Mary Kay would be over at the phone calling the hospital, offering to pay the bill and everything else. And he said, you two are going to make a fantastic team. I can just see it. You're going to be great. I remember that one time the psychologist turned down a person, and it really infuriated Richard, and he said, look, I think you just turn down somebody once in a while to prove that you're on the ball or something. And we're going to use this as a test case, and we're going to keep her. And do you know what? That girl who wasn't going to make it back there in those early days is today about to become a national sales director after all these years. Aren't you glad we stopped using those tests?
I bet, because it just shows that there's no test that
That's right.
can forecast who's going to make it in this business or who's suitable for this career. Just like there's no school you can get a formal training for ethics. There's not a book on professionalism or a school on professionalism. And I think success in this career, regardless of what our psychologists might have thought, is the success is born more of a caring, more out of experiences, out of working with all sorts of people. Do you remember, talking about success, when the brokers from down on the corner in the mall were up there one morning saying, "Mary Kay, it won't work"? They were in the door and you were leaning on it, so I just backed up for a minute, and one of them said, "Mary Kay, you cannot pay that kind of commissions and survive. You're going to go down the tubes." And then the other one chipped in and said, this thing of go give, you got to teach your people to be go-getters, not go-givers. And then the other one piped in again and said, and this thing about the golden rule, said, you better teach your people to do it to somebody else before it gets done to them. And as they turned to walk back down the hall, and you were saying, but, and they just walked off, you had that most quizzical expression on your face, like, won't they ever understand what we're trying to do?
Well, this was such a supposedly new idea, but it was gleaned over many, many years of watching people work with people and realizing that if you want somebody to do something, you have to treat them like you would like to be treated if you were in their shoes and they were in yours. And somehow this idea had not caught on in the corporate world. As a matter of fact, I'd be willing to say that still it doesn't have great listeners in the corporate world, even today. But I understand that my little book on people management, which was written 20 years after that original start, has now a lovely following in many universities across the country, and that they are now teaching it and finding that it's a brand new idea, this business about the golden rule, when after all our good Lord started that 2,000 years ago. Such an old idea, but apparently new right now. Amazing. Well, thank goodness we didn't let those stockbrokers color our thinking. And as a matter of fact, we grew. Even though they said we couldn't, we kept on growing. And finally, we really outgrew our little space, 500 square feet of space in Exchange Park, and we needed more room. And one Sunday afternoon, I believe, Richard and Ben, who now had come to join us and was working in our warehouse, drove around and looked for a new office. And on a little obscure street, they found the Majesty Drive location, 5,000 square feet. It seemed like the Grand Canyon to me.
I remember we had two private offices, and yours was a beautiful purple color.
It was on a purple ticket that
1960 purple, very nice. And Richard's was a very brilliant blue, a sailfish blue, and had a sailfish up on the wall. And I was really impressed with that.
You remember the reason he had that sailfish is because she wouldn't let him hang it up at home.
She wouldn't let him. Well, I the one really impression that Richard made on me was when he hired me was he, instead of putting me in the general office area or something, he said, "Well, come on in here with me," and he got a metal desk and he put me right there in his office with him, and in fact I faced the door, and the sales meeting room was right next door, and every day on Monday morning the consultants would come by and we'd say, how'd your week go? How did you sell last week? And they would share those with us and go back to sales.
It was a great spot for interviewing people too, remember? I came in for an interview and we had to stop about 3 times because Richard kept getting phone calls.
That's right. We had to quit talking because he was on the telephone. That's right, Ron. So Ron did all the beauty news and views printing. Well, that's applause we call it now, but it was originally beauty news and views.
Beauty news and views, right.
And in those days it was weekly, if I remember right.
Yes, it was.
Absolutely weekly.
It was wonderful.
Well, Thursday was a group effort. We all got out there and had our own little jobs of either stapling or collating or whatever, to get it out.
It wasn't really that hard to get it out in terms of getting the numbers together. We listed every order. I would take the weekly orders and I would put them in order of the highest to the lowest, and then I would give them to our one and only secretary, and then she would type it up, and then Ron would take it and do the mimeograph from that.
It was so wonderful, though, because the recognition was simple like that. And we think back now, and it was that soft rag paper. It wasn't the slick, the slick print. There was no artwork, and there was no pictures on it.
Yeah, and Mary Kay's personal notes.
Personal notes.
After it was all typed up, then Mary Kay would take it and she would write her personal notes on it. And wow, what a week! And you're super.
And we recognized everybody, because there weren't too many everybody's at that point. It was a lot of fun.
I remember specifically Mary Kay, when our real first seminar, when the first one was in the warehouse, but the first one I was at was our first off-site seminar at a hotel, and we really were going to get ready for it, and we were even trying to create songs, and had a song contest, and we were judging the songs from the consultants that sent in, and I guess some of the songs we use today came from that first contest. Mary Kay Enthusiasm came from that contest that we had.
You know, I thought songs were such an important part because in the company I was formerly with, when I joined them, they were a blah group, very blah, and I thought something's missing here, and decided to have a song contest for them. And I discovered that it completely rejuvenated that organization, made them enthusiastic for the very first time. So that's why I thought we should add songs and singing to ours. And remember that first seminar, my goodness, we decorated that empty warehouse, and it was empty. We didn't have any bins or any shelves or anything in there for a long time. And one day I said to Ben, for goodness sakes, Ben, buy some bins or something to make this thing look like a warehouse. It's just an empty space. We put some shelves on one wall, and I guess it was a wall about 10 by 6 feet, and we put everything we had, our entire inventory, on those shelves. And then, because we didn't want the people to take our inventory away, we covered it with butcher paper that day. And we all, remember how we all blew up balloons and hung that crepe paper? It was high budget. Boy, oh boy, was this a start on things to come. And then on the day of our seminar, first I unfroze all this stuff, and I changed clothes 3 times. I worked in the kitchen all day and changed to my first seminar gown, which I, by the way, still have.
I have mine too.
We do save everything.
Still have
don't
that
we?
dress.
And then when everybody had left, I changed clothes again to clean it all up.
Mary Kay, do you remember our entertainment for the evening?
Yeah.
One of the consultants' daughter was an operatic singer.
Yes.
And here we are in this warehouse with butcher paper around the table, and across that, and that canvas covering up the freight, you know, the doors that the truck's backed up to. And here she is singing this operatic aria with all of this.
Well, we had to have a little class somehow.
It was good.
And then didn't we have a 3-piece band?
Yes.
3 whole pieces.
That year I won that wonderful 7-inch black and white television set for being double queen of sales and queen of recruiting. It was wonderful.
A black and white.
You still have that?
A little 7-inch black and white.
Well, it was a big prize then, and
You
probably
bet.
all we could afford.
I thought it was great.
Well, you know, from the very beginning, I have felt that somehow or another we have to reward people for their efforts, and that was all we could afford at that time. But it has changed magically since, and now we have mink coats and diamond rings and wonderful trips to Europe and all kinds of great things. But back then we had to start from where we were.
You know, Mary Kay, I only thought about quitting one time in this whole 30 years. And I think it's really the only time I've gotten upset about something like that. I'd never had any experience in a company where they say, if you do a good job, you're going to get something extra. And the first time you came in and announced a monthly promotion, I was so incensed, I almost quit that afternoon because I thought you had to bribe me to do my job I was going to do. You know? It took a while to understand that. But I finally decided it was a pretty good idea.
Well, looking back, I guess the prizes have become something very unusual. I've had to think back on what I had received as prizes, and I remembered that I guess the worst thing that I ever won was that
Flounder light?
Flounder light.
You tried to forget it, didn't you?
Tried to forget it, yes. You know, the sales manager of that company had said he was going to have this contest, and it was going to be a wonderful prize. We lived in Houston, and of course the Gulf was just 40 miles down the road, and he was an avid fisherman. And when I did win the prize, I will never forget when he handed me a flounder light. Maybe you don't know what a flounder light is. It's a thing where you put on high-hip boots and you go out in the water and gig the fish. Can you think of anything I might have wanted less? And I remember thinking, boy, if I ever get to be the one who gives the prizes, just remember, don't give women flounder lights. But do you remember that one of our first contests when, remember now, in Beauty News and Views, we were printing all these people, like 10 of them. Fabulous, wonderful, terrific, great job, etc. I would say beside their names. Maybe 10 or 12 each week would get into this little area at the top of our newsletter. And one day I went into Richard and I said, Richard, we're going to have a contest. And this is it. Everybody who has $1,000 wholesale in a single month is going to win a golden goblet. He looked at me like I had lost my last rocker.
Well, we did about $10,000 a week, and you were asking the consultant to do $1,000 in a month to get a golden goblet. Now, it wasn't a golden goblet. This was a brass
22
goblet.
22-karat gold.
We just called it a golden goblet. It's kind of interesting. We only bought about 500 of those at a time, and I remember...
Didn't even buy that many to start with, maybe one.
Probably, yeah, just a few, but I remember going to Sales Director Joanne Powell's home up in Gainesville once, and I went in, and we were so embarrassed because she had won about 20 gold goblets, and she had them all on one tray sitting there together, and none of them were the same height. Our quality control wasn't quite what it is today. It was a little bit embarrassing, but she never said one word about it. It didn't matter.
Well, Gold Goblet was an attainment, because just think, we went from praising $100 in sales retail to $1,000 wholesale, and Richard looked at me and he said, Mother, I think you're crazy. I mean, this is impossible. And I said, Richard, let me tell you something. People will jump just as high as you raise the bars, and I think it will work. He didn't think so, but it worked so well that finally we had to dispense with the idea because some of our people had as many as 87. I think Bonnie Radke had 87 goblets and was trying to sell them back to us.
Well, Mary Kay, it could have been a gold toothpick.
I guess it could.
Instead of a golden goblet, because by that time we understood that if there was a prize, we all wanted and needed to win it.
I think that we are on the right track, and when we award our women what I call Cinderella gifts, that is, things that we all like to have, but most of us will never go out and buy for ourselves. And so that's why we give the kind of prizes that we do. Beautiful things that we all want, but we keep waiting around for that fellow on the white horse to bring, and he just never shows up. So they get them from our company.
I can remember back in the early seminars when we used to have a dinner in conjunction with our awards night, and I'll never forget one we had, one of the last dinners we had in conjunction with awards night, when, remember, everybody went through the arches, the Golden Goblet arches?
I remember.
And you had your picture made with every one of them as they entered. One of the most amazing things that you came up with this idea to do was all the Golden Goblet winners would sit in the center of the room in front of the stage, and then on a roped-off area outside of that would be those that didn't win the Golden Goblet. Well, I thought, up-front seating was a great idea, for those winners, but what I thought was a little unusual, remember, you served steak to the Golden Goblet winners and chicken to those that didn't win.
Well, that came about from a contest I had once held, where in my unit we had a steak and beans dinner. And it worked like this. If you won the contest and did whatever it was that you were supposed to do, you would sit at this table and you would be served steak. We divided the table into two parts. Half of it was beautiful linen and nice china and goblets and all kinds of pretty things and eating steak. And those who lost the contest sat on the other side of the table with butcher paper for their tablecloth, and they had broken china and twisted cutlery and all these kinds of things to remind them that they did not win. They also ate beans and cornbread. Of course, I like beans and cornbread so much that I would have sat on the wrong side of the table. But they had beans and cornbread and broken cutlery and all that. And it was such a wonderful idea, and it made such tremendous comments and all, that we had done that. So it was from that idea was born about serving the winners steak and the losers chicken.
It definitely worked.
It worked.
Well, Mary Kay, one of the things that I thought was so interesting, so often those that sat behind the ropes and had chicken this year made sure they got in front of the ropes for steak the next time.
Yes. Did make an impression, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Being a winner is such an important thing. It gives you a feeling of of accomplishment, and I think that just like all of our winners today, as they march across that stage, there's a feeling there that does not exist anyplace else. As you walk across and receive your prize, with all of your peers watching you, it's just a wonderful accomplishment.
But also the fact that those were things that could be taken out on classes, and people could see
Right.
these people as winners. And people like to do business with winners.
They do. Still do, by the way.
Well, Mary Kay, remember, you're always so gracious to have your picture made anytime anybody stops you. I'll never forget the last time that we did it at a seminar. We had everybody come in, sit down. There was 3,000 people that she stood there and had her picture made with, and it took us about 4 hours in the Dallas Convention Center. I don't know how you did it, especially with the flashes, and stood there for 4 hours just having your picture made.
Well, I felt that if they wanted to do that, that it was important that they have that picture. And even today, sometimes somebody will bring one of those long lost pictures back and show it to me and show us how differently we look than we do now. To tell you the truth, I think we look better now than we did then. Maybe it's my eyes have gotten weaker, but anyway, it was fun. My goodness, what a time that was.
Talking about traditions we've outgrown, Mary Kay, do you remember the main reason that we quit having outside speakers?
Yeah, I sure do. As a matter of fact, we found that hiring these people was very expensive, first of all, and that they usually made the same speech to us that they made for an insurance company or whatnot, and they really did not give our people what they needed to help them in their careers. And then we discovered that when we had people like Daleen, who was way up in our sales line there, speak, that the people got so excited because they could identify with her and with her achievement. And we found that having our top people speak was far better than having motivational speakers brought in who just really didn't understand our business.
You remember when you and I went to that Direct Selling Association meeting and we heard a man who impersonated a Russian official, and he spoke like a Russian.
Oh, yes.
And his whole theme was to talk first about how close America and Russia was becoming, but then he started knocking America, and the final analysis was that when everybody started getting excited about it, then he would stop and introduce himself, and he was a colonel from the Army and was a patriot and had won the Congressional Medal of Honor and was only showing just how lucky we were to be Americans. We thought, wow, what a wonderful thing, because it was so patriotic as an ending, so we thought this would be great, and we would have him come to our seminar. Our consultants and directors did not let that Russian get halfway through his presentation, and they were on their feet singing "God Bless America," and I have never been as nervous for my future in this company as I was that very moment. I was just glad you were in the boat with me.
Well, a lot of our funniest memories are those that didn't work out exactly the way we had them planned. Yeah, I remember a few of those times myself, and most of them have something to do with seminar entrances. Ron, do you remember the elevator with the laser lights that you'd built at the top of the staircase at one of our seminars, and it jammed, and when I was about halfway on the stage and it sort of threw me down the steps? Remember that?
Oh, that's one I'd like to forget, Mary Kay. That was one of the times I wanted to disappear. I'll never forget. I didn't know Richard could run so fast. He runs up to the top, and you look up at him, and all you tell him is, "Get me out of here." But, the trooper you are, we still had 2 more seminars to go, so we put you back in there, and you came up beautifully the next 2 times, so I was holding my breath, though, hoping you weren't going to get stuck in it again. But one of the funniest things, we don't tell you everything about seminar, and we try to inform you as much as we think you will need to know at the time, I guess it is. And I'll never forget the time in Canada at their annual seminar. We planned an entrance for you on a hot air balloon, And the only thing we forgot to tell you is that you were going to be up in the air in the top of that theater for 45 minutes while the people came in and were seated. But the trooper you are, you stood up there for 45 minutes waiting to make your entrance.
Remember that time when they had those two giant stallions, those white horses that pulled my carriage in
Oh,
through the
yes.
audience? Well, did anybody ever think how those horses might react when all those thousands of flash bulbs went off when they came in?
I started thinking about it when I saw the flash bulbs go off and the horses kind of rearing up for a minute.
Did you
That was another
bother-
time I wanted to go hide.
Did you bother to ask them if those horses were housebroken?
No, I didn't ask that question either.
One of the things I remember about those two horses was I was backstage before we came on having a live interview with Channel 8. And all of a sudden there was this noise that sounded like Niagara Falls. And I stopped in the middle of whatever I was saying to the interviewer and I said, "What was that?" And he said, "I think one of the horses couldn't find the restroom."
You know, speaking of flashes, we all know, Susie Vickers always had to make a grand entrance wherever she spoke. And one time we were doing a meeting in L.A. and she said she wanted to come in on an elephant. Could I have the aisle widened? Well, that was no problem, but I thought she was coming in on a real elephant. Luckily, it wasn't real, but it was life-size. And I'll never forget her assistant at the time wanted to document this footage, and she had one of these old Super 8mm cameras, that had the big bar on top with the big 4 lights on it. And so Jerry Ward was over there playing, and she saw his extension cord where his organ was plugged in. And so just as Sue started into the room, her assistant goes over, plugs into Jerry's organ, and all of a sudden the thing starts smoking. I mean, she just fried the inside of Jerry's organ, shorted out all the lights in the room. Needless to say, the program came to a screeching halt at that time, and we unplugged it and got a few lights, and Sue continued at her entrance.
Susie was different. She knew how to make an entrance.
You remember the time she came in on a cloud, Mary Kay?
Yes.
She didn't tell us these things until like the day before, so it wasn't any
Kind of
real
like
good
the way
planning.
you do me today.
Right. And so what we did, we got a golf cart and built a platform on top of it, did the elevator up about 8 foot in the air. We covered it with angel hair to make it look like it was a cloud coming in. Made room for the guy to see out of the angel hair so he could drive, and everything went great. She came through the audience, she made it to the stage, and all of a sudden the MC was ready to help her down. Well, she came off of that cloud on top of him, spread eagle on the stage, and here he is on his back, and she's sitting on top of him. So that was another grand entrance that Susie made on that time. We've gotten a lot more sophisticated, as you know, in planning and executing of what happens on the stage. And I think we all realize how special recognition is to our sales force and how powerful the stage is to all those consultants and directors.
Well, it is such a motivating power, Ron, and from my own experience, I can tell you that it's not only an awesome responsibility up there, it's a very humbling experience because so much energy flows up to the stage from the crowd out there, and I always leave the stage so energized. Mary Kay, I know that I used to just almost put you in a catatonic state sometimes because I didn't like to write my speeches, and I knew what I wanted to talk about, so I would just go up and talk without any notes. And I finally realized that really bothered you. So it was because of that I did learn to write a speech.
Well, I think it's very important because we need to have an idea of what it is you're going to cover, and then later on be able to capture that in print for our people who perhaps didn't get to come to seminar. But some of the best speeches that I do, they don't all resemble what I started out to say because I ad-lib so much.
The 15-minute speech that would last an hour and a half. We
Yeah.
remember some of those.
Yes. Matter of fact, when they tell me I have 15 minutes, I do 15 minutes and then ad-lib 15 more so they know it's always going to be 30 minutes.
Mary Kay, over the years, you have thrown us a few curves, in the control booth. But seriously, my peers with other companies really cannot believe what we accomplish with our recognition and motivation at our meetings. And we're the largest corporate meeting that's ever held in the nation. And also, we're the #1 customer, not only the city of Dallas, but the Dallas Convention Center as well.
Ron, you're right about people in other companies not really understanding how it works and our motivations. 'Cause I've always tried to point out that from the very beginning, almost everything that we have ever done has been geared toward the consultant. And I can tell you that in the early days, we didn't concern ourselves with whether something was affordable. And Richard was just a sheer genius at taking Mary Kay's ideas and making them work. I don't think that we ever put pencil to paper. It was just decided that some program or plan would work and would be really good for the sales organization.
You know, Gerald, when you talk about everything being done for the good of the consultant, I can certainly verify that, because for 30 years I've seen it happen over and over and over. Corporate people will be debating some new program or service, and invariably someone in the meeting says, now let's put ourselves over in the shoes of the consultant and see how that would feel. And this, probably more than anything, has been the reason such faith and trust has been developed in this company.
Mary Kay, speaking of recognition, and you remember the first publicity that one of the first publicity that we ever got was when in Texas they came out with personalized license plates. And I never will forget, Sue Vickers came in and said, I want you to help me come up with a personalized license plate. We had a bumper sticker, red bumper sticker that said, ask me about Mary Kay. And so Sue and I came up with this idea, and her license plate said the letters R-U-A HAG, H-A-G. And then bumper sticker, ask me about Mary Kay. And that was on the front page of the Dallas newspaper. And our name for the first time was mentioned, at least locally. Another time I remember too was when we opened the Atlanta office.
Oh, yes.
And we decided that we were going to have, that this was our second distribution center, we were going to have yellow roses from Texas would be dropped from a helicopter as the directors in the area, and then we had about 8 of them, would be standing there in their antebellum gowns and their big, beautiful antebellum hats. They would stand there, and as the yellow rosebuds came down from the helicopter, they would cut the ribbon. Well, the problem was the helicopter got just a little bit too low, and the draft grabbed their skirts, their big antebellum gowns, and took them over their heads. Well, of course, being ladies, they all grabbed their hats. So the photographer took the picture, and that was on the front page of almost every major newspaper in America.
The States, right.
The Los Angeles Times, the Chicago newspapers,
Right.
Dallas, New York, everywhere.
And you know, one of the things that I remember is the fact that there were a couple of photographers there, and they were about as bored as anybody could get. Another opening, another ribbon cutting. And they were practically yawning their way through this when all of a sudden that helicopter came down, those skirts went up, and I mean, they came to life. And it really was a real coup.
I think this is one of the greatest stories, and when you really think about it, was when in Chicago we were snowed in.
Oh yeah.
We
that
had
was
the
a great
jamboree.
story.
Right. We were in the Hilton Hotel, and we were snowed in with 1,700 consultants, or somewhere in that number. I don't remember exactly.
That's right.
But the bottom line was that they could not get out. The airport, O'Hare Airport, was closed. They couldn't drive, and there they were. And most of them didn't have the money to stay.
Remember what happened?
Mm-hmm.
That I was afraid to come down in the lobby because I thought they would be belligerent and rebellious and all kinds of bad things. And so Mel went down ahead of me, and he got a large sum of money, and he went around the lobby saying, when he saw somebody crying, honey, what can I do? And she would say, I don't have the money to stay overnight, or for food, or for anything. And he would say, how much do you need? And he would just hand her the money, and he did this all over the lobby that night.
Mm-hmm.
And Mel kept no track of how much money he had given to anybody, and didn't have any names or anything else. He was just giving out money indiscriminately. And the next week, the mailbox would be crammed full of letters, and when I would get home, Mel would be sitting there counting money out of these opening letters and counting money. And I said, hey, what kind of a racket have you got here? What is this? What are you doing? And I know that he got back every single cent without keeping one note on who got it or how much. But that shows the kind of wonderful organization that we have. And Mel felt he used to say, I'm the chairman of the board, remember?
Yeah.
And he was so proud of that title.
Mary Kay, I'll tell you the time when I thought our company's history had flashed before my eyes. So I was in Florida, and my secretary called and said, 60 Minutes is trying to get in touch with us. I said, 60 Minutes? So I called the gentleman back, and he said, yes, I'm a producer for 60 Minutes, and I've heard about Mary Kay, and I want to
come and talk to you. So I immediately got our lawyer and said, what do you think about this? And he said, well, you don't have much choice because really we didn't know what kind of approach 60 Minutes wanted. He came and visited, and I brought the producer, Jim Jackson, over to visit you. And he said, I took him to the airport. He was going to Atlanta to visit Coca-Cola and talking possibly about doing something with them too. And so we thought, well, we'll probably never hear from him again, but it was just not very long after, a couple of weeks, and he said, okay, we do want to do a piece on Mary Kay.
And I remember that he showed up at the door that day and he said, hi, I'm Jim Jackson from 60 Minutes. And I thought, oh, my goodness. I thought, what do I do? Do I invite him in? Because you remember what happens to people who refuse to be interviewed. And he sat down with a whole sheaf of papers where he had questions on top of questions. And he began asking me all kinds of things. And this went on for a couple of hours, and I answered to the best of my ability, wondering what was going to happen, of course. And finally, he got to the end of it, and he said, okay, my objective today was, first of all, to find out, is there really a Mary Kay? Second, if so, are the stories we've read about her true? And third, she's a great grandmother. Could she climb out of her wheelchair long enough to be interviewed? And he said, and I'm happy to tell you that you have passed the test on all 3 counts. Don't call us, we'll call you. And he left. And we didn't know what was going to happen. And that was on a Friday, and on Monday was Memorial Day. And we got a message at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon that they would be there at 7 a.m. in the morning. Well, I don't know about you, but if you knew that 60 Minutes was going to be at your house in the morning at 7 o'clock, you start seeing things you never saw before. Like, there are spots over there on that baseboard where she's hit it with the vacuum cleaner. I've got to fix them. So I sent Mel out to, well, first I had a quart of yellow paint, and with a lip brush I was making all these repairs. And I was going around touching up spots on the baseboard wildly, and Mel was helping me. That was my second mistake. He flipped the in-house vacuum hose around and knocked over a quart of yellow paint on the middle of the living room carpet. I cried. Oh, Mel, what do I do now? And tried to get that up, and it was disastrous. So I had a little turpentine there to clean that lip brush with, and I poured the turpentine on it. It looked like it was a little better, so I sopped it up as best I could, and I said, go get some more turpentine. Handy Dan or somebody must be open. And he went out, and he came back with a gallon of turpentine. I poured the whole gallon on the spot. And needless to say, in the next morning when they got there, it was still swishy. And where do you suppose that cameraman decided to set up? Right in the middle of a squish. And if he looked at his shoes that night, they had to have yellow paint on the bottom of his shoes. And he kept saying things like, it smells funny in here. And I thought, you should have smelled it before those 3 cans of Glade. And I remember that Marley Safer asked me a lot of crazy questions, and they would go from a business question to a personal question and back and forth. And I remember that at one point he said, Mary Kay, now I've been around here, this was on the second day, for a couple of days, and every time I turn around I hear the word God. Aren't you really just using God? And that was when there was a divine intervention. And I said, Marley, I sincerely hope it's the other way around, that God is using me.
Boy, was it positive.
Was it ever?
It was almost, what also was interesting was that night that it was aired, one of the biggest pro football games of the season was played. They went into overtime. More people stayed home. It was the biggest 60 Minutes audience that they ever had the night that our show was on.
Well, they did repeat it, 2 years later, and
true.
by that time our sales had quadrupled and our numbers had tripled. Yeah. Remember, another thing that got us some publicity was when we decided that our trucks that would be going to California and Atlanta and all those different subsidiaries would be painted pink. And you remember what a time we had with those truck drivers at first, because they would park a block away. They were so embarrassed about driving a pink truck. But we had given them Peterbilt trucks, and finally everybody admired the Peterbilt truck so much, that's the Cadillac of the trucking industry, that they became very happy about driving those pink trucks. Of course, I did have that other idea, you know, about having them dress in pink jumpsuits. I never quite got that one across. They just wouldn't do it. They said, don't you know we have enough trouble driving a pink truck without wearing a pink jumpsuit? But they today drive those pink trucks across the nation, and they drive them with all of the pride in the world.
Mary Kay, this is a story that I don't know the truth of this, but one of the drivers told me that one day he stopped at a little hamburger joint on the highway, and there were a bunch of Hell's Angel motorcycle guys in there, and they started giving him a bad time, and they even put their cigarettes out in his coffee, but being a Mary Kay truck driver, he didn't want to create a scene, and he left. The story is that when he came back through a few days later, going on the way back to Dallas, we stopped back in, and the waitress said, yeah, they were really laughing after you left, and said, what kind of guy, what kind of man would drive a pink truck? And she told him, well, I don't know what kind of man he is, but he's not much of a driver. He just backed over 4 motorcycles. That's a funny story, but on a serious note, Mary Kay, it's just been in the last couple of years that I've really begun to see clearly how many lives that have been changed for the better. And I'd say that this is the real mark that we have made on America, while so many other people or groups were talking about women's rights and and we're going to help elevate women. You really took the practical and helped give women the opportunities that they enjoy today in a real practical way. I guess for me the challenge is to take this internationally, and how exciting it is for us when we go around the world and we see that women in other countries, or maybe where our beauty consultants were in their lives in the early 60s. And even Russia, they're even or back into the 30s. We have the plan and we have the philosophy that we can take around the world and help women develop just as we've done in America. And that is so exciting for us, and the realization of the lives that we're going to change in all of our new markets.
You know, I've often said that we're not really in the cosmetic business, we're in the people business. In the business of helping women change their lives and helping them to know how great they really are, because I think this was God's intention when we started this company, was to help women. And whenever you mention international expansion, I cannot help but think of the faces of those women experiencing freedom for the very first time in their lives.
When we opened Canada, you remember, Mary Kay, we had asked the U.S. consultants to give us leads in Canada, and we had, I think, something like 400 people that were going to come to opportunity meetings. And we had opportunity meetings across the country in 1 week. We started out in Montreal, Canada, on Monday, and we had an opportunity meeting, and it was the biggest snowstorm that they had in Canada in years.
Remember that night, though, that about 5 o'clock, just an hour or so before this meeting was to be held, that they came on television saying, do not, we repeat, do not leave your homes unless it is an emergency. And I thought, thanks a lot.
That's right.
Because here we were having our very first meeting in Canada.
That's right.
And they came anyway. And I knew that with that kind of stalwart people, that we were going to have a successful organization up there. That they could get out in that kind of weather and come. What an organization we were going to have in Canada. And
yeah, I think 30 of those people did come, and we recruited almost every one of them. And then the next morning we had the training class. Then we got on the plane and went to the next location, which was Toronto. We did the same thing there. The snowstorm was following us, but we made that trip across at 5 different cities in Canada in 1 week's time. I think in the final analysis we recruited about 200 beauty consultants in that 5-day period, and that was the beginning of Mary Kay Canada.
As I look at the names today, many of those people were the original people who were recruited.
Oh, absolutely.
Still there, 15 years later.
And I think we've all had so many experiences in that vein of seeing people's lives change as a result of using the product or participating with the opportunity. My first experience with that was the mother of two who had become so unsure of herself that she would not get outside her own home, and my hostess finally got her in for a facial at the class and coaxed her into a little bit of makeup. A few weeks later, her husband bought more of the product for her, and the bottom line to all of it was that from going from a person who couldn't get outside her own house, she became president of the local PTA. And then about 2 years later, she was president of the Young Women, Republican Women's Organization, and was president of the board, junior college board. So
and that's wonderful. And to think, really it is true that when a woman feels pretty on the outside, she becomes prettier on the inside too, and has great abilities that she never knew she had. That's a wonderful story.
Well, I think it gets back to the fact if we can help people build lives, then we can really build a business.
Right.
I know it's sometimes difficult to explain our philosophies to have people, even right here in Dallas, understand why we do things the way we do. It was definitely a Mary Kay way, a Mary Kay corporate culture. It's thrilling to see it spread throughout the world and to know it still works.
It's a different world that we exist in today, Mary Kay, but as you always say, some things never change, and I think that Mary Kay is one of those things. The value is always going to be there.
As we talk about the changes that have been brought about in people's lives, I'm just so thankful. I think the Mary Kay opportunity came along at the moment when the winds of change were just right for women. And God's timing was perfect, as it always is. The compelling thing to me about the company is that it is a spirit-driven group of people who have the energy and have the drive to change not only their lives, but other lives much for the better.
Well, today I know that whatever the future might bring, our philosophy will be perpetuated. And I know that my legacy is assured. The company has my name, but it also has a life of its own. And its lifeblood is the philosophy that many thousands of women have made a part of their lives. These women embody that philosophy of sharing and giving, and as such, that philosophy will always live on. And I want to thank each of you who were the pioneers in our business. When nobody else thought it would work, you stood by me with your loyal, wonderful spirit and helped us to make our company the success it has come today. So thank you, Daleen, for being that very first consultant, and Ron for building the wonderful reputation that we have throughout the entire nation, and Gerald for you for helping to take us international so that women around the world can experience what we enjoy.
Thank you, Mary Kay.
It's been our pleasure.
Thank you.